This month, we talk the latest trends in first-person shooters with Rob, Chris, Shawn, and Pierson, with a focus on the games Titanfall 2, Doom, Battlefield 1, and Overwatch. And I swear I only mentioned D.Va once. We focus on the narratives by first talking about how we as academics dedicate our time to story modes in games. What are some of the popular narratives in first-person shooters, and what is the experiential difference between the stories we tell about gameplay? Do first-person shooters need a single-player campaign at all? This and Pigeons in this month's podcast. My name is Alexandra Orlando, and you can find me at AlexGOrlando.
My name is Pierson Brown, and I'm very mysterious.
My name is Shawn Dory, and you can find me at Shawn Dory.
Chris Lawrence at Quips Lawrence.
My name is Rob Parker. You can find me on Twitter at RobotParking.
This month, we are talking all about the latest trends in first-person shooters. I should preface this by saying that we're also focusing on the narrative elements of first-person shooters. We as scholars have to prioritize our gameplay time. So how do you guys prioritize narrative experiences over maybe more relaxing, and I mean relaxing by not thinking about it, like you're going to write an essay on it type thing?
The interesting thing about the way that I at least have been going around consuming some of the recent FPSs that have come out, it's almost been entirely vicariously. I haven't been playing Overwatch as much as I would have liked, for example. But instead I find that I'm actually spending more time seeing snippets of the game being posted on places like Reddit, Twitter, YouTube. And I feel like I have a better sense of the evolution of the game, both in terms of new characters, new strategies, funny things that have occurred through those media than I do through first-hand play experience. And so it's a little bit unfortunate that I don't get as much of a chance to play the game properly as I would like. But I still get to kind of live the game community, the game experience, by the stories that people are remediating through these other channels. And I've just noticed that becoming a larger part of my consumption of FPS lately.
I have a far less intelligent answer insofar as I don't worry as much about making time for games because I'm just a bad student and a terrible academic, so I just play a shitload of games anyway.
Yeah, noble and honest to boot.
And as far as narrative in FPS games is concerned, I tend to skew towards older shooters in general, and I've always had an appreciation for how well I think FPS games have environmental storytelling down pat. They've been doing it for a long time. We were talking about some newer trends today, but I think back to a game like Unreal, which has no dialogue to speak of, no cutscenes.
Or not to speak of.
Yes. And yet it tells a completely engrossing story about an alien world and a fictional culture through the eyes of her protagonist who never speaks.
And this is the campaign to be okay.
This is the campaign.
The original Unreal, right?
Yeah.
So I'm in a weird spot because I do academic-y stuff, but I also just have a full-ass time job, and full-ass time job.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the technical term.
It's a lot of ass.
Neoliberalism, am I right?
Yes.
And the last shooter campaign that I played all the way through was Doom, and I did that when I was on vacation. So my solution is just go on vacation and don't do anything but play a game. That's any other time. I picked up Titanfall 2 and I've been poking at the campaign, but for the most part I'm just playing in blocks of time and I'm just playing the multiplayer. I've always had this weird skepticism about first-person shooters telling a really cogent or coherent story. I've been more interested in the moment-to-moment gameplay systems or narrative systems.
So that's actually one of the things that I wanted to kind of steer the conversation towards is kind of looking at how we have started seeing narrative. We started locating narrative more in these war stories that come out of multiplayer engagement with these games, as opposed to like the first-person campaign. To the point now where we're seeing a great many of the FPSs that are contemporary being released without a campaign mode at all. There's some games that are coming out that don't have a story written into them as much as they have grounds where players can make stories through their play, and I'm just kind of interested in tracing that back through to how we got to here.
And I think Doom and Titanfall 2, for example, like have some commonalities there in that they have like some baseline narrative trappings, and they have some slightly meditative points where there's some dialogue and stuff. And I'm actually like stopping and reading like information I pick up on different enemies in Doom, which is weird. You wouldn't expect that, but it's actually kind of interesting and like well written stuff. But ultimately it is those you're basically moving from like arena to arena to arena,
right?
And those systems are incredibly pleasurable and incredibly fun to engage with.
Yeah, and this is the campaign system.
That's campaign system in Doom, and also in Titanfall 2.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I know a couple of people who make YouTube videos of both CSGO, it's Infinite Warfare right now. They were making Black Ops 3 when it was really interesting to me talking to them about like how they make the decision of what's a good clip from a play session to throw into your cutcom versus what isn't a good one. And like the act of choosing like the sad moments when you're doing something, when you're talking about something that's not sad, or like the really cool moment when you're kind of having a lull in your story, and like the creation, like fusing like the vlog content with gameplay content is like this new art form that I've been very interested in recently.
And sorry, these are people you know who are posting YouTube clips of their campaign play or multiplayer?
Multiplayer.
Multiplayer.
Sorry.
Multiplayer. Okay. By sad moments, you mean
like getting your shot? Getting your shot all lined up and just dying horribly, and then you cut to a next part of the vlog, and it's like a slightly different part of gameplay, and it's like this like live conversation that's like cut up into the most entertaining gameplay behind.
So for me, I think that so much time right now where I am not talking to people or interacting with people at all when I'm doing my work, it's very hard to me at the end of the day to start up a game and then proceed to not talk to anybody and not interact with people. When I'm taking a break, I will always be playing a multiplayer game, and Overwatch has become a family affair for me because my team consists of my brother, mostly some of his friends, or some of Reed's family. We get a whole team together usually. That's the best thing for me. And my brother and I will like Snapchat each other. Like that's what I use Snapchat for, is like pictures of Overwatch. So he'll just snap me something, like one of his plays of the game. And like I'm sure there's a better intuitive feature to send me that, but Snapchat seems to be the thing. That's what we do, and that's why I find that single player games are really tough for me to get through. And if a game has a multiplayer, I'm looking at the two. I'm like single player, multiplayer, and it's like I'm never tempted to pick that single player over the multiplayer because you need a break. And sometimes, like, even though people can be jerks online, like at least you're talking to somebody.
I reconnected with a couple of friends from back home playing through the campaign of Black Ops 3 together. So we didn't really pay attention to the story, which I regret because that was actually it was apparently kind of interesting, but it was a lot of just finding those moments where like we were all free. Like one of my friends is married, the other one's still doing his undergrad. I'm here, and we're all in different provinces now. But it's like we're still back in our dorm room. Like the game becomes this meeting ground for us.
So do you think then first-person shooters are good for that because you're not as interested in the stories? So you can have those like other conversations.
Yeah, we try to do it like with multiplayer too, but zombies in campaign have always worked. The hecticness and stuff I find in online is like less manageable and more distracting in certain degrees.
As a counterpoint to Alex's thing, if I play sometimes just like public random stuff, especially with Titanfall 2. If you are on a public random game, I will die muting you. I will screw up our team just so that I can stop what I'm doing and mute you immediately. I do not want to talk to people. I want to be left the hell alone. Just as a counterpoint, but like I also talk to people all day at work. So,
but is it really a counterpoint? Because you were talking specifically about meeting with friends and family and people that you already knew going into it, and I find that that's definitely the way I tend to approach FPSs in particular, but most multiplayer games, is that I'm absolutely agoraphobic about the larger social context of this play, but I adore playing with friends. It's one of the few ways that I have, for instance, to socialize with friends of mine back in Vancouver. I feel we all probably have this sense of dislocation from our kind of gaming cores if we grew up elsewhere than sunny Waterloo, Ontario. Oh yeah, I just wanted to point out that it might not have been as much of a counterpoint as kind of like the other half of the equation, because I've noticed that there's been a couple times where there can be good games of Overwatch, I've noticed, where you kind of get along with your teammates and they'll actually like voice chat you and be like, hey, that was actually, you're not actually a reprobate shitlord. How about we group up and go together? And nothing has made me more paranoid and made my stomach sink than having somebody go, I like you. I would like to get to know you a little bit better online on Overwatch. I just like quit, get the hell out of there. Like,
Really?
Oh yeah, cannot do it. Absolutely no, I absolutely can't. If it was another friend introducing me mutually to somebody that was a friend of his or hers, or theirs, it would be different. But for me, it's no, I can't do just the general public.
See, we invite people to our group. And if they shriek on the mic like we do sometimes or whatever, like we do our random things and they're into it, like, it's a morale boost, I think, in general, if you're being a little silly. But like if they're into it, we've had a few people join the clan for a bit and for one game, and then we're like, no, we're done with them now. That was it. So I guess steering it back a little bit, I'm sure we could talk forever about online experiences, and that's kind of, I think, part of the narrative that seems to be in what we're starting to see with first-person shooters, especially, again, you think of esports, you think of these play-the-game games, which I'm seeing it a ton of lately. Another game that I recently tried was Rainbow Six Siege. Their play of the game is actually very bad. It's the ending of the game camera, but nothing happens at the end of the game because you've killed everybody. It's not like you even see the last kill. It's just like you're on the point and then you're like looking around and like maybe you shoot in the air a little bit. And then they have an MVP sort of like ranking thing, but if you're the MVP, you stand in the middle of your crew, and like then you're the MVP. Right. So it's everywhere now. Heroes of the Storm has it. Yep. I'm sure we could list a bunch of other ones, but and the upvote feature too is in the Heroes of the Storm now. Yeah. Okay. So you can. Everyone has like it's like Overwatch basically. Yeah, so that seems to be one of the trends that we're focusing in on, is these like gameplay moments, these kind of war stories.
Yep. And I think we can actually lump most of those things that you're gesturing towards under kind of the more general umbrella of states of exception. I was thinking about this as you were talking, Shawn, about the people that chop up their play and post YouTube videos. When we're looking for YouTube videos of people playing games like Counter-Strike or Overwatch or what have you, we're not generally looking for normal play. I mean, there's some people that will watch a Let's Play or just watch a streamer go, but there's a reason why streamers tend to post the videos of what they've streamed online after the fact, but edited down to just the interesting portions. And so if you think about it, the things that we're focusing on when it comes to telling these war stories is not, I played a perfectly normal round of Overwatch and did pretty well.
Sometimes that's good, though.
I mean, yeah.
I didn't get bothered by some jerk on the mic.
But if you listen to the way you framed that in and of itself is a state of exception. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Like, you're framing it in a way that's like, isn't this interesting and not the norm?
Yeah.
Somehow.
I didn't have to die to mute this person.
Right. Right. I actually managed to get in the menu, hit the mute button, back out again, and still frag the bleeper that was behind me. So this is kind of the trend that I've been noticing emerge out of the way that we've been speaking about the way we narrativize multiplayer play on FPSs. Yeah.
You just reminded me of like what they call all this in game design classrooms, which is emergent narratives.
Right.
So design, like all of these games are like designed not just to facilitate. Like we've gone past the point of design to facilitate emergent narratives, and now we're designing ways to remember emergent narratives.
Yeah. But also to kind of separate the noise from the actual interesting signal. Because there's so much play out there. I mean, if we could just, concatenate all of the recorded play we have, I mean, there'd be way too much for any one person to sift through, and it would likely be an extremely boring experience if one was to, look through the last 5 days of everybody playing Overwatch and the entire planet. I think that the interesting thing, I mean, emergent narrative can be interesting. It can also be pretty banal depending on what occurs. But what I think is really, really neat is that we've seen this practice that was developed as FPS has evolved parallel to systems like Twitter and YouTube, where people would kind of distill this to its essence of states of exception and post these states of exception online, to games actually beginning to try and hone in on these states of exception algorithmically and say, this is that we're going to hand this to you on a silver platter. This is something you're going to want to go for in game. People purposely try to play Overwatch, for instance, in a way, or Call of Duty as well with the Rainbow Six Siege does this as well, the end of game. They'll actually try to play so that the end of game is the most interesting, like they'll only use the knife throw to try and get the last kill so that it actually looks impressive. But that still doesn't change the fact that we are having these states of exception kind of served up for us so that we can go remediate them with greater efficacy. And I think this is this interesting, the voting system as well. This social mediaization of multiplay is, I think, a thing that is a very interesting trend. And it intersects in a very interesting way with emergent narrative as well.
It seems weird to me that the Rainbow Six Siege team wouldn't algorithmically hone in on when is the tipping point in this match where everything fucking explodes, because that is what they sold that game on. That's what those trailers were. Is like you have to have some way to track how much and how quickly did like every part of this house explode, and like cut to that scene and show it from like some kind of dramatic angle. Like that has to have been something that they thought of at some point.
And if Overwatch is any lesson, I mean, Blizzard is arguably one of the best polished, most resource flush studios out there at the moment, and they are having a hell of a time trying to get their play of the game camera to actually focus in on interesting states of exception consistently. I remember during the beta, the only thing you would ever see was Genji killing 6 people in a row. That was
really?
Every single time, every single play of the game, it would always be a Genji or a Pharah or whatever. It would just be like a team kill, and consistently the same thing. And the complaint was Mercy players were saying, Mercy is a healer for those who are only peripherally aware of Overwatch, and is just not generally capable of killing the same number of people in a concentrated period of time as a more offense-oriented hero such as, say, Pharah or Genji. And many players that were supports were saying, we feel underappreciated because there's amazing plays that we make, but they're not recognized by the algorithm because we're not staving in people's faces with the same efficacy as our teammates are. And then Blizzard's algorithm flipped to the opposite direction, where Mercy would fly into a group of dead teammates, revive 2 or 3 of them, maybe shoot a Roadhog a couple times in the butt, and play the game. And so it wound up becoming banal in completely the opposite way, where every single play of the game was, here's a little bit of revive, and that's it. And they've been tuning it ever since, but it's a very, very difficult balancing act, it would seem. Yeah. I mean, you'd think it would be easy for them to get right, but...
And I think that's why we need to be careful about talking about Overwatch as somehow setting the standard.
Yes.
Because Blizzard has the resources to maintain live teams with like resources that probably dwarf even, what the Destiny team has.
Yeah.
In terms of just they have hooks in there to make money. Yeah, I like in terms of the sheer amount of resources and time, Blizzard has deep pockets.
So
and where it is. Oh, sorry, Chris, you've been.
It's okay. I was just thinking, I'm hearing and kind of observing these games with development teams, big ones, with lots of resources trying to hone down these states of exception and get an algorithm that kind of finds them. And from kind of an outsider perspective, I'm looking to a much simpler game, Rocket League, that seems to just manufacture these states of exception as the rule rather than the exception. And that's not a particularly narrative-driven game.
No.
But it's interesting to me how these resources are being diverted to slightly more complicated experiences, whereas you have Rocket League that just generates them without even trying.
Yeah. Or just even to link back to, you're talking about systems that are designed to be shared across Twitter and YouTube and all that stuff. Again, this is not a AAA game, but Super Hot.
Super Hot. Okay.
Yeah, Super Hot came out. Super small team. Looks stylish as hell. Looks great, and it's time only moves when you do. So it's kind of a very slow moving game. But when you get to the end of a level, when you finally get to the end of a run, it'll show you it in real time, and you can then in menu generate a playback of it and upload it to a server, and then you can you can tweet that out or whatever. And I've gone back to that a couple times. They did a Halloween update and stuff like that, and you can shoot pumpkins, and it's super stylish and super good, but it doesn't. Basically, every shot just looks really cool.
Right.
And there's a huge dichotomy with, I think, the first-person shooter when we compare, like, we're focusing more on the AAA here, but when we compare what AAA is doing with first-person shooters for the most part, and then indie, that's the hugest gap, I think, between, I don't want to say quality, but I want to see, like, cookie cutter versus experimental. Mm-hmm. Like, Call of Duty gets a bad rap for being, like, the laziest design game, which of course people work very hard on Call of Duty, but they're, it's Call of Duty, it's the same Call of Duty every year. They have their zombies in the campaign and the multiplayer, and you rank up and blah blah blah, and you know what you're gonna get. But at the same time, you look at all the other games as well, and when something really experimental comes out in AAA FPS, is it highlighted even more so because we have a lot of our, cookie cutter, mundane AAA games coming out in the FPS realm? Even Battlefield, I think, is getting the rap now for another Battlefield game.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I know the angle you're coming at this from. You mind if I give it a stab?
Yeah, go ahead. Stab away.
Okay.
Or shoot.
Bang. Done. Put it out of his misery. No. So you brought up Battlefield 1 as kind of being an example of this game that came out amidst great fanfare. I can't tell you how many times I saw that clip of the Pigeon moment from the first level of Battlefield 1. The Pigeon moment in Battlefield 1 is their attempt at pointing to one of the odder historical accuracies in World War I, where when the British in the Battle of Cambrai in 1917, the first major tank push of the First World War, sent all of their tanks into the German lines. No tanks had been seen really en masse before this point. Their only means of communicating with the artillery support, which they often needed to break strong points, was by means of carrier pigeon. This is true. This is actually the case. There were between 4 and 6 pigeons left in every tank. And the Battlefield 1 campaign manufactures a moment where you're part of a tank crew, and they get mired in mud. And all of a sudden, there's a bunch of German foot soldiers crawling over the tank, trying to, pry open the hatches and shoot the occupants inside. And a whole bunch of Scottish people inside the tank begin to yell at each other to release the bloody pigeon. Insert quintessential Scottish name here, or else I'll shoot you. Tension builds, a guy gets shot, and then somebody manages to toss the pigeon on an open window, and then you are the pigeon. You are now playing as a carrier pigeon, flying over the pockmarked battlefields of Cambrai. And beautiful music is playing, and you're getting a literal bird's eye view of the action below. And then, the pigeon lands, the artillery gets their orders, they shoot the tank lives, the Germans on the tank die, and then you continue to mow down people for the remainder of the level. This was another one of these interesting, this is a super different thing. No one's ever played as a pigeon before in a first-person shooter. And so really kind of focused in on that.
Rob's trying to think of another instance in a first-person shooter where you play as a pigeon.
And
I'm pretty sure there was a Quake mod at some point.
I'm sure there was. But like a AAA studio devoting considerable resources to actually making a canonical experience wherein you take over the role of a pigeon.
That's fantastic.
It is beautiful.
Yeah.
In a way.
In that one sequence, you actually maybe convinced me to care about Battlefield 1.
That's too bad. I'm sorry. I apologize.
No,
I'm going to EB Games now. How about this?
Yeah, screw the podcast.
Pigeon level.
Podcast. Yeah. Wow, man. We should
There's EB Games as well.
Yeah. GameStop. Not GameSpot.
By the way, we're not sponsored, but EB hit us up with that collab. Come on, man. The parallel I think you were trying to draw is between kind of these radically innovative indie games that we see coming out quite often, and they just don't have the same impact as incrementally different but more or less the same repackaged experience that AAA studios tend to produce. And I think this is a classic conundrum in kind of the games production environment that we have today for a couple different reasons. And one is that you kind of need this background mundanity to make these states of exception actually interesting. If everything is a state of exception, nothing is, if that makes sense. But the other thing that I wanted to gesture towards is the notion of the attention economy. So these states of exception, these stories that people are telling about their experiences in a first-person shooter game, they need to be intelligible to other people in order for them to actually carry social weight. So playing as a pigeon, you don't have to have played that much in the way of first-person shooters or even Battlefield 1 at all to know that playing as a pigeon is pretty interesting and not particularly common first-person shooter experience. But the same thing when you stumble across a glitch or you pull off an absolutely amazing kill combo in Overwatch or what have you, there's a certain set of literacies that go along with people being able to parse out what is interesting about the state of exception that you're showing them on whatever media platform you are, even if that includes playing with them in the game. And unfortunately, I think what it comes down to is that there's this intrinsic recognition that many games are important, many people like games because they know other people are playing them. And so there's this attention economy dynamic that goes on where people are less likely, generally speaking, and I'm generalizing horribly, to find themselves drawn into and sharing indie shooter mechanics and states of exception because they know that there are just fewer people out there, writ large, who it will be intelligible for. Whereas everybody and their dog plays Battlefield 1.
I wonder if novelty plays a factor in that, though, or like to kind of tweak that a little bit. If you are sharing something from a game that no one has ever seen, that's going to have a bigger impact. I'm thinking here of like someone find, like say Devil Daggers tomorrow figures out a way to.
Devil Daggers is going to get.
You knew it was coming. And so Devil Daggers, if you haven't played it, is this real short playing, like it's almost like a score attack, but it's essentially an extremely difficult shooting arena. You're basically on a floating platform in a black abyss, and then skulls come at you, and you are shooting daggers out of your hand. And
is this the VR game?
It can. So I think they added VR support, which sounds sickening.
I think I saw the Game Grumps playing it.
Oh, maybe
Ross was turning himself into Silly Putty to avoid the daggers or to avoid the heads, I think.
You were avoiding skulls that were chasing you. Yeah, and it's and you're shooting like to collect these red gems or whatever. But it's like if you survive 55 seconds in that game, you've done something really impressive. And on their leaderboard, they have all these. They'll have like you can see whoever's next to you and whoever's below you in terms of how they survived. And you can also see like the top of the leaderboard where someone has survived for 10 minutes, and it's upsetting to see parts where like I've struggled so much and they're just like they've cleared the entire board and they're just standing there waiting for the next thing to start, and I'm like my god. But because there's like people it's gotten a decent amount of coverage, there's still some people that play it, but it doesn't have it's no Overwatch, right?
Right.
It's like the super hexagon of shooters with a culture of shaming thrown in for good measure.
Yeah, and it is just goth as fuck.
So has anybody told you that you should be working in the advertising industry?
I'm terribly unhappy.
So you should be working in advertising, right?
Yes.
As a former refugee of the marketing department of the
excellent diction,
nameless company.
Soul left. Yeah, it sounds perfect. Anyway,
but yeah, like the novelty, like the states of exception, even if it is just business as usual, but someone has never seen something like that before, that has a really compelling aspect to that stuff.
And I think that's actually a good example to what I brought up, because I think games like Devil Daggers, God, what a name. It includes within it a certain kind of inborn intelligibility, right? Where like you can see that something neat is going on, and it's pretty obvious what this person is having to do in order to perform the game well, and it kind of almost sets up the literacies needed to parse that intrinsically. Whereas there are other games I think that I'm struggling to think of a good indie shooter right now that might not be quite as intelligible.
I was afraid to ask, but we've been talking a lot about this kind of idealized concept of an indie shooter later. Right. And we've talked about Devil Daggers as an example, but as someone who doesn't get through quite as many indie games as maybe I'd like to, I'm wondering if we could talk about some examples.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so the ones that came to mind when I was thinking about this were games like Verdun or Red Orchestra, which I guess, depending on what your definition of indie is, could kind of fall either side.
Can we talk about the elephant in the room?
Sure.
DayZ?
Oh, DayZ. Okay.
And also that's a really good vector for talking about how that experimental space can get like reabsorbed into AAA. If you look at Tom Clancy's The Division and the Dark Zone stuff, it is very much them going, okay, people just like being assholes to each other. Let's give them that ability. And boy, howdy, if you want to feel horrible about yourself, go in the Dark Zone right now, because it's the only people that are there are assholes.
Go in the Dark Zone.
That's all that's left.
Yeah.
Go in the Dark Zone and try to be nice to people.
Yeah.
And see what comes back.
I still try it. I still hope.
I feel like there definitely is more variance in like the indie shooter market, but I can't help but wonder if that's just because like indie companies are only now like starting to do that.
Maybe then I'll just like throw this question out. Is there a place for campaigns in first person shooters anymore?
I think so. I think we're seeing a swing back toward campaigns in first-person shooters. You have kind of a revitalized emphasis in AAA games. For example, Titanfall 2, the fact that it has a campaign in the first place. Battlefield 1, all the attention put toward those interesting experiences. Being a pigeon would have been unthinkable 3 years ago in a mainstream first-person
as
shooter.
A corollary to that, almost none on the multiplayer, at least from my perspective. And I've been
pigeons in the multiplayer?
No, not only no pigeons, but not very much attention either.
And then you have games like Doom, where the campaign is the reason to play the game. The multiplayer is kind of an afterthought. I'm wondering to what extent this is kind of a response to backlash against the weakening and de-emphasizing of campaigns in subsequent years. Games like Battlefront that shipped without really any kind of meaning, or Star Wars Battlefront that shipped without any kind of meaningful single-player experience in the first place, and were criticized for that.
Well, and I think that's a kind of interesting example because I think that Star Wars lends itself to a campaign while maybe other games don't, especially your Call of Duties and your Battlefields. I know Infinite Warfare, Patrick Klepet was on the Waypoint Radio, said he's really enjoying Infinite Warfare storyline. So, and that's kind of a thing that I think a lot of people dismissed at this point as the Call of Duty campaign. But there's, I think, like how many war stories can one play in a video game at this point? Star Wars, it's based in this like movie franchise where we want to play out, the experience of these particular characters. Overwatch is also has very interesting characters, but they're doing something very different with the animated shorts and the comics and all that. I don't think I would want to play an Overwatch story mode. I know TF2 had that big joke for the longest time to get people to quit the game where it's like, there's this big elaborate thing you had to do to unlock the story mode in Team Fortress 2. And that was like the joke for the longest time. But I don't know. I don't think what would a campaign for Overwatch look like? I think they're doing a great job with the animated shorts. Mm-hmm. I think that's exactly what we wanted. And then Team Fortress 2 kind of eventually did that when they started doing their little shorts and then the movie editor.
Yeah.
So. It turns out fan fiction is the campaign for Overwatch that we all need.
That's right. Yeah. You just make the characters, and then the story comes afterwards naturally through. And
I say that with a great deal of affection. The amount of stuff that has come out around Overwatch has been amazing. And by the way, if you work at Blizzard and you continue to insist that characters cannot be gay, you need to stop and you need to really wake up to what your audience is telling you.
Yes, Mercy Farah is the ultimate ship right now.
No.
Isn't it?
Roadhog's Lucio.
What?
The only way.
Lucio?
Only way.
That before. What?
OTP.
Okay, well, we have some variants in the room, I suppose.
With Montagues and the Capulets in here.
I feel like you're making that up. I don't believe you, and now I will have to Google later. Because
Really? Will you?
Why not?
I'm gonna Google right now.
What could you possibly turn on the Wi-Fi?
No, do not turn on the phone.
Cross the signals.
So I'm definitely imagining Alex leaving this podcast at the end in a huff to go Google most angrily.
Oh, I'm going to look up this shit so hard.
I'm going to be so pissed.
It does exist, but it's not something that's talked about much.
Well, we got to bring it back.
Hanzo and McCree.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh.
I picked that up in the Halloween event. I'm like, there's some spice happening here.
Yeah, there's some
spice.
Yeah.
So Blizzard, get on that.
Well, or at least if people tweet at you about that stuff, maybe don't back away from them. There were some tweets that were going around about whoever's running the social media account. Someone's shipping these two characters, and then they're kind of shaming them for it, and I'm like, that's. Come on.
Well, and now there's this whole thing where Blizzard's going to reveal which characters are gay or something. And it's just
don't do it.
Leave it be. Leave it.
This is actually too much story that they're trying to add to the situation.
Exactly.
I guess to go back to the original question, do we need first-person shooter campaigns anymore? I would ask two questions. What is a first-person shooter and what is a campaign?
Oh, no. Oh, the ontology question. Oh, God.
No, but so for example, is Dishonored 2 a shooter? Because that game lives and dies by a coherent story, or at least a world to walk around in. But I would suspect we ran a review of vocabulary of game design back in 2014, Sebastian Ate, thank you very much for writing that book review. Please get in touch if someone else would like to write book reviews for us. And there's a whole chapter on that devoted to, it was written by Anna Anthropy and Naomi Clark, and there was a whole chapter devoted to game verbs. It's essentially, what are you doing in your game? What is the player doing at any given point in time? If you're shooting, are you jumping? All that stuff. And the argument that they make is essentially, instead of adding more verbs to the mix, you want to ideally try to build on those or make it so that they're more meaningful in context with each other. So you sometimes have those maximal AAA releases that are just like, all of the verbs are in here. You can level up and you can do all this and you can talk with people, and then you have other situations like Doom where it's like you shoot the things and then you remove their face with your hands, and then you hit them in the body with their face, like you were just doing violence. Violence is the only verb in Doom, and then you jump. And
your story is not making sense here. We got two verbs now.
Violence
we
and
two
vertical
verbs.
mobility.
Violence and vertical mobility. And so, like, again, if you look at Dishonored, the default verb that you're going to be doing, like sneaking, or like the Deus Ex games, right?
First person sneaking.
And I think there's still a place for that, because those games are getting a lot of great reception, but they live and die by their world building. Yeah, I guess the latest Deus Ex.
I still haven't got through that.
Mankind is divided about mankind divided.
Divisive reviews.
Yeah. In terms of Titanfall 2 or Doom or Overwatch, I don't think we need the scripted campaign. I think we've kind of been dancing around that, but like just saying emphatically, I think that's what the response has been, is just, we don't need the give me the waypoint, follow the guy, shoot the thing in the face. I think people are looking for either a bit more, or they want that like arena type thing, which is hilarious because we're kind of going back to what was originally like the standard game design, because that's all they could do is like, here's a room full of monsters, murder the monsters.
Right. So, excellent observation. I think if I'm to speculate wildly here, I don't have much evidence to back me up, but I feel like there might be, we're kind of probably in the middle of a great divergence, if you will, where there's kind of a consumer expectation that if you go into an EB or a GameStop, one of the rare dying breeds that are slowly becoming supplanted by. I think that the idea of wandering into a store and buying a physical copy of a game that costs $60 is intrinsically linked up with this notion that it's going to be full-featured, whatever that means. I don't think that people have a good sense of what full-featured actually does mean, but they know it when it's there. Mm-hmm. And in the case of going and buying a $60 game like Star Wars Battlefront, and it has a multiplayer, right? So that's my $30. Where's the other $30? Even if people never played it, there's a certain sense of entitlement to, I put a certain valuation on games that have shipped with both and have been fully featured. And so if you're charging me AAA money for AAA game, it better have AAA completeness. Whereas I don't think I've heard anybody levy the same complaint against Overwatch, for instance, which, both games foregrounded the fact that we're not going to have a single player campaign, but the difference was Star Wars Battlefront cost $60, Overwatch cost $30. Mm-hmm. And so if we're beginning to see this split where there's a certain set of games that kind of, I like this Verb idea that you come up with, or have
Anna Anthropy and Naomi Clark.
The idea of games being verbs, because I think that the ones that have diverged into arena shooters are very quite clear about what it is they're doing. Capture and destroy, and there you go. Just get it done and do it in interesting ways. Whereas there are other games that are going to try and be more nuanced and allow for greater play possibilities, but are going to come with a higher price point. Like Dishonored, I bet Dishonored 2 is going to wind up being a $69 game, a $70 game.
What's interesting to me with that observation you've made, that there's a certain valuation going on when we examine multiplayer shooters, that doesn't seem to work the other way around. Single-player shooters with no attempt at multiplayer can sell for $60, and there's no complaint about valuation there. BioShock was a $60 game. It was recently resold as a $60 game with slightly better graphics. Wolfenstein: The New Order was praised as a $60 game, and it had no multiplayer whatsoever either. Doom was praised a great deal, even though in the same breath reviewers often noted that the multiplayer kind of sucked. But fuck if the campaign wasn't the most fun and interesting and kinetic thing about this year.
Good points.
Yeah, no, I was thinking the same thing. I think there's not a vocal complaint. I would say there's a small minority of people who do complain about the narrative experience in their games, but they'd also say that games are being too much like movies. It's like a current divide in like the game design space is whether or not we want to like move away completely from like the cinematic feel like AAA industry has gone to. It's not really a can of worms I want to do more than poke at.
And I think also that when we talk about fundamentally, when you start looking at shooters, the number of verbs or the ways that they design are kind of limited, which means you're kind of limited in terms of narratives if you want to have something that's like actually ethically or like logically coherent. It's all well and good to like go out and say, here's a bunch of demons from hell, go kill them. It's a little bit different if you're like, oh, here's a bunch of Muslim people, go kill them, which has prevailingly been the story for a lot of war themed games. And again, you've got Uncharted, whereas like this ne'er do well, like that. I don't want to say a little narrative dissonance, but I'm gonna have to.
Don't do it.
But like the idea that essentially you're kind of bottlenecked in terms of the stories that you can tell with those types of shooters, because at a certain point you still have to let people go out and let them off the chain and let them go and murder without feeling too bad about it.
Well, and just to throw my 2 cents in for that is, I've been talking to Steve Wilcox, past editor-in-chief of First Person Star, who's working with Unreal, and it took him forever to work in a dialogue system for Unreal Engine, and how much that engine affords, like down to the engine affords those kind of gameplay experiences. So, you know, if you want story, you want dialogue in these kind of games, you gotta work really hard to do it, and they're not going to be always willing to make that exception, to spend all this time and working in the system in a game when you just replace dialogue box with gun, and then, or not even replace, but like just keep the gun instead of the dialogue box, and then you're good to go, right?
I just have this mental image of like going up to an NPC in Steve's game, and then it does like the BioWare zoom in on their face, and then they've just got a gun hanging out of their mouth.
Starts wiggling around ad nauseum. It's like, well, this person is speaking the language of gun fluently.
Yeah.
How am I going to respond? Bang, bang, bang.
Yeah, am I going to say Glock to them, or am I going to say, I don't know. I don't know that much about guns. Magnum to them.
Hammer.
This verb thing.
I've ruined everything.
No. It's great. I know that we're beginning to run out of time, so I just kind of wanted to posit one more provocation because I haven't done it enough tonight already.
Not nearly enough.
FPS. When we talk about the games that we set out to talk about today, I think for the most part are games that do foreground their multiplayer and their social elements. And I just wanted to posit the notion that games such as Dishonored really are still kind of like FPSs in the sense that you can replace S with shooter, with stealth, with sneak, with SP and not. No, I didn't just do that.
Scholar.
Shameless plug.
You are sneaking around and reading a lot,
yeah.
which is pretty much the life of a scholar.
Yeah.
That's all we do. I just crouch in the air ducts and read scholarly papers.
I think whatever Corvo does, though, is a little bit more lucrative than what we do. But
yes,
that's a topic for another time. I wanted to kind of flip that observation though onto the other kind of stuff, because I think we can draw a distinction between games such as Dishonored and games such as Overwatch that seem to set out with entirely different intentions in terms of what they are and what they do. And thinking more about Overwatch as being an FPS in the sense of first-person shooter and first-person sharing as well.
Okay.
As being kind of like the verb that really kind of undergirds one of the logics that runs through games such as the multiplayer elements of Titanfall and Overwatch and what have you.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'm
Yes.
glad we're agreed.
I agree.
Yep. Your turn.
I don't really have a thing aside from just wanting to point out, like, one of the things that I really appreciate about Titanfall is they don't necessarily have, like, post this clip to YouTube. I guess you hypothetically could with PS4 at any point in time. But, like, at the end of every match, the game flips, and it's basically like, okay, you lost, but time to bug the fuck out, because you basically, like, at the end of a match, you have to evacuate.
Oh.
The losing team has to get to a drop ship and needs to get out.
Yeah.
And so it kind of drops all pretense, and you are still in it. It's just like, okay, my objectives have completely changed. I need to make my way over to where the dropship is in a not completely obvious way, and hide until it shows up, and then get into it, and then hopefully get away, or stick around and fight whoever. Like, if the other team has a whole bunch of Titans, they'll be able to attack the dropship and blow it out of the sky, and then no one evacuates. The winning team has the objective to shoot the other team down before they can get away, but it just completely flips it, and you are just suddenly even if you've lost, you've forgotten about that loss by the time you're running for the dropship.
Fascinating.
That's completely true. I remember from like the alpha or whatever when I was playing it, like that was probably the most interesting feature to me. Was like the first time I was playing, I had this moment of, oh, well, we lost, but then like I'm still playing all of a sudden, and like that experience of, oh, hey, and then like I remember I hadn't figured out how to mute anyone in the game, or they might not have put the feature in yet.
Priority number 1.
Yeah.
Sean, priority number 1.
Okay, it was
Yeah.
anyway, like someone on voice chat explained what was going on because it was an alpha test, and I don't know, I just got the lucky nice guy and I was like, oh, hey, okay, this is what I'm doing. And it was like this really cool like moment where like even though we weren't like really cooperating up to that point, like there was this level like just the act of change. I don't know.
Well, and it's also one of the things from that Verb perspective, like one of the major additions was they added a huge traversal system. Moving as a pilot in Titanfall is like you are sliding and jumping and like wall jumping and wall running. This is kind of before a lot of that stuff had really kind of come into like Call of Duties and stuff like that. And you are booking it across, and that in and of itself is like skin of your teeth, just like skidding to a stop and like doing a double jump and getting into the dropship is like a super awesome feeling. And it kind of forced the like one aspect that maybe slightly de-emphasized in the whole shooting aspect of the rest of the game. And it seemed like a really intelligent way to kind of give you that reason to share those stories.
I want to take one more stab at this attempt to sort out the verbiage in first-person shooters. I know that shoot is like the primary one, but I think as far back as games like the original Wolfenstein, there have always been 3 verbs: move, shoot, and interact. In Wolfenstein, the only meaningful interaction was opening doors and finding secret passages. But a year after that, you've got Doom, where there's switch-based puzzles introduced into the environment. And I think trying to sort out, genres at this point, if you go back to those 3 verbs, you find a lot more games that we've been arguing about still fit back into that FPS fold. Because interact,
that's gone home there.
Exactly. You can now bring in indie games once again. These so-called walking simulators or first-person narratives are all about the moving and the interacting, not necessarily the shooting, but they still fall under that umbrella with the same kinds of techniques and affordances.
I like that a lot. And then there's also Blake Stone, where you would like talk to informants.
I've been playing Blake Stone. It was on sale on Good Old Games.
I'm super glad that you're doing that.
You can't circle strafe. It's so upsetting.
Yeah.
I'd like to. We're running out of time, but I'd like to say that I haven't played Titanfall 2 yet. I'm interested, and you describing the drop ship mechanic makes it seem like Titanfall 2 is basically, at least that section of the game is like playing cruise control for cool Lucio and also D.Va when she's out of her mech. So. Because that's basically what it is. It's like if Zero Suit D.Va was Lucio, there you have that idea where you lose your mech, so you're like, I'm not doing anything useful. Time to try and gun down whatever I can as I jump around like an idiot. Also wall jumping, so I'm very interested.
Yep.
You've sold me on that.
Excellent.
I just have one other question in that vein. What is the incentive for getting back to the dropship?
It's a fun thing to do. I think you actually get like you might get a bit of experience as well.
Yeah.
A pittance, if you will.
Yeah, there's a little. It's enough that it feels good.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I like that.
What was the incentive of Sparrow racing in Destiny, where all you got was helmets with 0 stats?
And cool scarves.
God damn it.
Cool scarves.
Yeah.
Scarves are important.
Do they ever bring that
Racing
back? I haven't played Destiny in a while.
It's probably coming back in December.
Okay.
I should have given you the ability to unlock playing as a pigeon. That would have made things better.
Yeah.
Sparrows versus
It's Sparrow
pigeons.
racing,
Pigeon
not
racing.
pigeon racing. Come on.
Spiro, not
actual bird.
Pidgey.
I want Spiro racing. I want to race as Spiro Agnew.
It's doable.
And that's the end.
Well done, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the First Person Podcast. I would like to thank Neil Randall and the staff at the Games Institute for their support, as well as Alex Fleck, our podcast producer. We'd also like to thank Stephen Trothan, who wrote and composed our theme music.